She's like a sickness in my brain, a vision standing by the window pane. She ripples through the blinds and leaves me in a daze. It's in the way her body moves me, the way she grabs me and intoxicates, until the signals in my mind forget to operate. In a fragile skull, I take my pleasure from my alcohol. She'll never give you any time at all. She just comes and goes, you know. And she's got me living in a chemical love, and I try to find the strength to know when she comes back to me again. I'm gonna come up from my hiding.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. So the case that we're talking about today has had my mind spinning for weeks, and it seems like, everybody's been talking about this case. Everybody's been asking me to cover it. I've seen people covering it, even though I don't know how they are covering this case, because it seems like every time something new comes out, it just adds another layer of confusion and mystery to the facts of the case. I'm not even lying to you. I did all my research for this. I was going to record it, and then another huge piece of information, or I guess like evidence, or basically an interview with the person that we're talking about today, dropped 18 minutes after I finished the, final touches on my research and my script. So in this case, there are obviously facts. There's also speculation. There's a lot of rumor. There's a lot of gossip. There's a lot of people filling in the blanks. But I am going to tell you how I feel about the case. And that doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean that I know the truth of what happened here. I think only very few people know the truth about what happened here. And in fact, I think probably it'll be a very long time, if ever, that we know exactly what happened. But this does mean, based on what we do know, based on my instincts of who's being honest here, who's lying, who's trying to cover their own behinds, I have formed what I believe to be a well-educated opinion on this case, and I cannot wait to hear what you all think. So I guess this all started on March 6th, 2015, when Janie Santana filed a report with the Houston Police Department claiming her then 17-year-old son, Rudy Farias, had vanished into thin air while he was walking his two dogs around their neighborhood. Just last month, on June 29th, 2023, Rudy was found, slumped and unresponsive outside the Immaculate Heart Church in Southeast Houston. So this kid has been missing for like 8 years, and all of a sudden he just shows back up outside of a church in the same city he went missing from, and everyone was like, whoa. It's a miracle, right? And then on July 3rd, Rudy's mother, Janie, released a statement to the media saying, quote, "My son, Rudy Farias IV, was found on Thursday, June 29th, after being missing for 8 years. Currently, we do not have any additional information on Rudy's case. What we do know is at the time of his recovery, a Good Samaritan located him unresponsive and immediately called police and 911. My son Rudy is receiving the care he needs to overcome his trauma, but at this time, he is nonverbal and not able to communicate with us. We are asking for privacy during this difficult time, but we'll share more details as Rudy continues to heal." End quote. So this woman's literally acting as if she just found her son, as if her son just came back into her life and he's had this trauma, but she doesn't know what it is because he can't verbalize it yet, which is common, like let's say Rudy was kidnapped in 2015 and held captive by some evil, mean people for 8 years, and he certainly would have a hard time verbalizing that and talking about what happened to him as he kind of tried to grapple with the fact that he was now free. That's the statement she made. That's what everybody kind of believed, and everybody knew that Rudy had been missing since 2015. I mean, there was billboards around Houston with his face on them saying, "This kid's missing. If you see him, or if you know anything about where he's at, call this number." Now, like I said, the initial reports coming out of Houston heralded Rudy's discovery after 8 years as a miracle. A person who'd been missing for almost a decade, returning home to his loving mother. How often does that happen? However, it was quickly discovered that the situation was not how it appeared at all, because when Rudy was found, apparently he had his mother's credit card in his possession, in his pocket. But this credit card had not been issued to Janie Santana 8 years or 9 years prior. She had had that credit card 2 years before Rudy was found at the end of June 2023. And so obviously we all had to ask the question, if Rudy has been missing for 8 years, how did he get his mother's credit card that she'd only been in possession of for 2 or 3 years? So we're going to dive into the twists and turns of this case, but first, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark VPN. In today's case, one of the people involved has been referred to as an internet catfish. Reportedly, she uses people's pictures that are not her pictures in order to scam or mislead others, and this is just a regular reminder that the internet can be a scary place. Or, in Game of Thrones speak, the internet is dark and full of terrors. Speaking of Game of Thrones, did you know that with Surfshark VPN, you can unlock 15 of the largest Netflix country libraries, including the US and Japan? All you have to do is connect to the server in the right country and off you go. But back to the internet, it can be scary, but it can also be wonderful, jam-packed with all the knowledge in the world and new friendships and connections to explore. You just have to do it the right way. And luckily, Surfshark VPN can also help with that. Surfshark VPN exists to help keep you protected on the internet so you can enjoy all that the World Wide Web has to offer with an unburdened mind and an open heart. Surfshark VPN secures your data with industry-leading measures by using uncrackable encryption and the most secure VPN protocols, and Surfshark also provides IP and DNS leak protection so that nobody can figure out where you're connecting from. I also love that unlike your internet service provider, Surfshark VPN has a strict no-logs policy. That means they aren't watching or recording or keeping a log of what you're doing on the internet because you're a grown-up. You're a damn adult, right? I hope so if you're watching this video, and it's no one's business what you do on the internet. So what can you do better on the internet with Surfshark VPN? Well, a lot. First of all, you can overcome location price-based discrimination on travel expenses like plane tickets and rental cars. If you're traveling internationally, you can log into a server in your home country so your bank account doesn't lock you out or freeze your account for security purposes because they see you're connecting from a different country. You can also feel safe on public Wi-Fi, which is never a sentence I thought I would actually say, because Surfshark VPN encrypts your data and makes it impossible to steal, and you can easily and quickly get around censorship and geo-blocking so that all the information you want is available, not just what they want you to see. At this time, Surfshark has reached the coverage of 100 countries, and they are the only VPN to do so at this point, which is pretty awesome. Surfshark also has an app for every platform, whether it be PC, Mac, Linux, Android, iOS, smart TVs, Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV, Chrome, Firefox, Xbox, PlayStation, and one subscription allows you to install and run Surfshark on an unlimited number of devices at once. Your devices, your husband or wife or partner's devices, your kids' devices, your parents' devices. There's so much value in Surfshark VPN, and they think you'll agree, which is why they're giving you a 30-day money-back guarantee, and that offers you plenty of time to try Surfshark VPN out for yourself risk-free. And if you think this all sounds great, this all sounds like a great deal, it all sounds like something you would be interested in, that's all true. It is a great deal, and it is something you would be interested in, and I have an even better deal for you, because if you go right now to surfshark.deal/stephanieharlowe and use code stephanieharlowe, you'll get 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. This special offer makes your subscription just $2.21 a month, less than a bad cup of coffee from the gas station. Once again, go to surfshark.deals/stephanieharlowe and use code stephanieharlowe to get 83% off a 2-year subscription at Surfshark VPN plus 3 extra months for free. Great deal. Don't wait. Go check it out right now. Thank you so much to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. Rudy Farias IV was born to Houston police officer Rudy Farias III and his partner, Janie Santana, in October of 1997. And it really seemed like Rudy was fated to have a hard time in his life right from the start. Because in 2011, when Rudy was just 13, his half-brother, Charles Uresti, was killed in a motorcycle crash. And according to private investigator Brenda Paradise, which, by the way, is like the coolest private investigator name ever, Brenda Paradise. Like, I could make an entire series of fictional novels about a PI named Brenda Paradise. But anyways, Brenda Paradise, the PI, she said that Rudy and his mother, Janie, were the first people on the scene after the accident. And this was very traumatic for Rudy. Losing his older brother in general was very traumatic for Rudy because, as Brenda said, quote, he watched his best friend die right in front of him. His brother was his best friend in the world. He's just gone through so much more than anyone his age ever should, end quote. And as I said, Rudy eventually is going to come out and give an interview, like 18 minutes after I finished my research on this case. And you can hear it in his voice when he talks about his brother and the loss of his brother, that this was one of those events in someone's life that changes you irreparably and for the worst.
When I lost my brother, I didn't have anybody to teach me how to live, how to have confidence or trust in myself or anything, so.
And then just 3 years after that, in August of 2014, Rudy's then 51-year-old father took his own life in a police parking garage after an investigation by KHOU 11 revealed that 4 police officers of the Houston Police Department, including Farias himself, had been involved in a fake speeding ticket scheme. An analysis of months of speeding tickets written by the Houston Police Department Traffic Enforcement Unit revealed how Farias and 3 other officers had listed each other as witnesses for speeding violations, but according to GPS coordinates, these officers couldn't have been witnesses to these speeding incidents happening. They couldn't have been there at all. They were never there to witness these infractions because at the same time that they claimed to be witnessing these infractions, they were writing other speeding tickets at other locations, usually miles away, and then saying that their fellow police officers who were also not on the scene of those tickets were witnesses to those tickets. The records show that these 4 officers wrote more than 5,000 speeding tickets combined, with fines totaling more than $350,000. And it seemed that their motivation to do this was, can you guess it? Money. If they had to appear to testify in court more often, you know how you get a speeding ticket, and then if you challenge the speeding ticket, you show up to court, and the police officer who wrote the ticket has to show up in court too, and if they don't, it usually gets thrown out. So if these 4 officers had to appear to testify in court, they could collect more overtime. And reportedly, in the 3 years prior to this scandal being revealed, Farias had earned $158,000 in overtime. So not only were these 4 police officers screwing the people of Houston by writing them speeding tickets that probably, didn't need to be written, but now they're, charging taxpayers of Houston all this extra money for overtime that they didn't deserve and didn't, legitimately get. Now, according to members of Rudy's family, these tragedies and losses, first his half-brother and then his father, they were extremely traumatic for Rudy as a teenager. And it was at this point that his mother, Janie, began to take over his life. And this is according to relatives of Rudy and Janie, that when Rudy kind of went into a depression, when he was having some mental health issues, his mother stepped in and kind of just began controlling him. And then in 2015, Rudy went out to walk the dogs and he vanished. According to what his mother, Janie Santana, would later tell law enforcement, Rudy had left their home wearing blue jeans and a black t-shirt and brown shoes at around 6 p.m. on March 6, 2015. He was taking their 2 dogs for a walk near Tidwell and Park Drive in Northwest Houston, at their actual suburban neighborhood. He wasn't going outside of the neighborhood, and this trip should have taken under 20 minutes, as it usually did. But Rudy did not return home. Hours later, one of his dogs arrived back to to the house, but there was still no sign of the other dog or of 17-year-old Rudy Farias. The next morning, the second dog returned to the beige 3-bedroom ranch in Houston that Rudy lived in with his mother and his grandmother Rosa, but Rudy was not with the dog. Rudy was reported missing by his mother on March 7th, and Texas EquuSearch soon became involved with trying to locate him, and their efforts included putting out flyers with Rudy's information and pictures on them. The missing persons flyer stated that Rudy had been diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety, and it was likely that he was no longer taking his prescribed medication. Rudy had previously also suffered from an injury to his right leg, according to his mother, and this caused him to walk with a slight limp. And his mother said he hadn't brought his asthma inhaler with him. And people should understand that he would also be very wary around strangers. He was shy, and it seems that Rudy had some special needs. His cousin Michelle Rodriguez told the media that although Rudy was 17 biologically, his mental age was closer to 10. Now, a handful of private investigators were willing to donate their time and expertise, and they also stepped in to help search for the missing teenager. But right from the start, these PIs, as they are trained to do, saw multiple red flags, and they felt that there was something really off about the narrative that Janie Santana was spinning. Now, listen to what these PIs said, and then ask yourself the question that I'm going to have you ask yourself several times throughout this video. Why didn't Houston PD, the Houston Police Department, see these red flags? Why didn't they sense that something just wasn't right about the situation? Retired Port of Los Angeles police officer Martin Rentiera, along with his wife Barbara, are both licensed PIs, and they run Checkmate Investigative Field Services out of Spring, Texas. The couple, as PIs, worked on Rudy's case for 2 years, and they said Janie's story just didn't line up from the start. The Rentieras visited Janie's home several times in those 2 years, more times than you have fingers, according to Barbara. She's adorable. And on their very first visit, they wanted to know, where are the dogs? You know, the dogs that Rudy had reportedly been walking when he vanished into thin air. And according to the Rentieras, Janie could never produce the dogs. Sometimes she said, she didn't know where they were or they weren't around. But every time Martin and Barbara asked, she just couldn't, show them where the dogs were. They never saw the dogs, and they never saw any evidence that dogs had even lived in the home. The Rentieras also noticed something odd about the house itself inside. Barbara said, quote, "There were padlocks on the doors in the hallway." End quote. The PIs also found it strange that Janie Santana would never let them question Rosa Rodriguez, her elderly mother, who also lived in the home. Now, recently, Rudy's aunt, Pauline Sanchez Rodriguez, has come forward and told the media that during the 8 years Rudy was supposedly missing, her mother, Rosa, would always say she had seen or spoken to him, and he was there at the house. She said, quote, "My mother would always tell me, Rudy is here. He's there. He's in that room." And Janie would say, no, she's lying. She's losing it. End quote. Martin and Barbara Rentiera, the PIs, they went into Rudy's room in 2015 to search for clues of his location. And, they found a normal teenage boy's room. They found his homework on his desk, filled out in his neat printed handwriting. But they were also shown a letter that had allegedly been found in Rudy's room. And Janie Santana told them that Rudy had written this letter, claiming that he'd run off on his own. Now, the PIs thought that there was something off about this letter because it was written in cursive. Not the neat print that they saw was Rudy's handwriting from his homework. And Janie hadn't shared this letter with the police or the public, deciding instead to go with a more sympathetic story that her son had disappeared. And then she also started telling people that it was the most likely scenario that he'd been abducted by traffickers. Janie claimed that a witness had seen Rudy struggling with a gang of older kids on the day of his abduction, and she claimed that they found his crushed cell phone at the site of this alleged struggle and abduction. Once again, it does not appear that Janie Santana shared this information with the police, but Janie did hold a fundraising event using this abduction scenario as a platform to raise money to help search for Rudy. And she even brought up the alleged witness who had seen this struggle between Rudy and the older boys. And this witness was a teenage girl, and she apparently, spoke at this event, this fundraising event. Now, when Martin and Barbara Rentiera questioned this young girl, they found her story to be suspicious. Actually, they found her story to be kind of incoherent and just, falling apart immediately. Barbara Rentiera said, quote, "She couldn't hold the story together, so she just walked away. This was someone who Janie had forced into talking to us," end quote. Martin Rentiera also found it very odd that all the leads he and Barbara were getting were coming from Janie Santana, because usually in cases like this, they would be getting tips from the public, reports of sightings from the public. But all the leads came from Janie, including 2 reports that Rudy had fallen into the hands of Mexican human traffickers. Private investigator Brenda Paradise also has come forward to talk about the many signs that something was off with Janie's story about her son's disappearance. For instance, initially when Texas EquuSearch was printing up flyers, Rudy's missing person flyers, Janie had purposely given them the wrong date of birth for Rudy, and so the posters had to be reprinted. Janie also would refuse to give them a more current picture of Rudy. So if you look at the picture of Rudy, the only one that's really seen out there on his missing persons flyers, on the billboards, on the news, it doesn't look like a 17-year-old. He looks like a 14-year-old, like 14 tops. And apparently Janie said the reason that she'd given the incorrect date of birth and the reason that she had given this, out-of-date picture of Rudy was she felt if he appeared to be younger than 17, they would get more sympathy and more people would be on the lookout for him. When in fact, what you're doing is having the public look for a much younger person and not, a 17-year-old and not how Rudy looked at 17, which it feels like it would be more difficult to find him in that case, don't you think? It's almost as if Janie was asking for everyone to look for someone who wasn't really missing, and she just didn't want them to realize that they were looking for somebody who wasn't really missing. Now, a couple of days after Rudy went missing, volunteer searches with Texas EquuSearch located a book bag with an inhaler at the alleged, scene of Rudy's abduction, kind of around that area. And Janie claimed, oh yes, this is Rudy's book bag, this is his inhaler. But PI Brenda Paradise said, quote, "Rudy never even had asthma. The backpack had some elementary kids' homework inside, and that wasn't Rudy's either," end quote. Another private investigator, I can't remember his name right now because I just read this very late last night. He said that Janie had told him she had information that Rudy was with human traffickers in Mexico and that he was actually in the presence of a woman who worked for the cartel. And Janie had been in contact with this woman and she gave this PI this woman's number and he called the woman. And this lady was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I already told Janie I don't want to be a part of her scam." So as we come to find out, Rudy Farias was not missing for 8 years. He was only technically missing for 2 days because he'd returned home on March 8th, the day after his mother reported him missing to the police. But then she never contacted the police to let them know that her son was home. And in fact, publicly, she continued to behave as if Rudy was still missing for the next 8 years. On March 22nd, 2015, a GoFundMe page was created seeking donations to help Janie Santana find her still missing son. And on this GoFundMe page, Janie begged for help to find Rudy, who she claimed had physical and mental disabilities. And the page ended up bringing in, roughly over $2,000 in donations. In April of 2015, the Houston Police Department publicly claimed that they did not believe there was foul play involved in Rudy's disappearance, and they were investigating him as a missing person. So clearly, the Houston police at that time felt that Rudy was actually missing, even though he wasn't. He was back home. But in 2016, Janie Santana claimed that the police had told her that her son may have been abducted and sold to human traffickers.
I'm afraid.
She'll share her fears, but not her face.
He hasn't checked his Facebook. He hasn't checked emails. Just nothing.
It's been that way for more than a year. No word, no signs of Rudy Farias, a 17-year-old Pasadena high school student and his mom's only living son.
It happened too fast. disappeared.
Rudy was last seen walking his dogs right down here along Park Avenue that evening. He should have returned home in about 15 minutes, but his mom never saw him again.
He has such a huge heart. He loves with all his heart. So that's why we know that he wouldn't just get up and go on his own. That's not him.
Detectives have warned family members that he may have been abducted and sold for human drug trafficking. That's why she's hiding her face.
It's a nightmare that you want to wake up from.
But like so many other parents of missing kids without answers, the nightmare continues.
That's what's killing me inside.
Rux Russell, KHOU 11 News.
Imagine going on television, literally not being brave enough to show your actual face, saying these things, acting this way when the whole time you knew that your kid was not missing, not in the hands of traffickers, but in your home and in your hands. Imagine what kind of person does something like that. Apparently, according to family members, a habitual liar, a manipulative person, and a scam artist who catfishes people on the internet for money and clout. I believe Janie Santana has some sort of criminal history. She has a gun offense in 1994, but more interestingly, she seems to have been married several times, like 5 or 6 times to several different men. And in fact, one of these men, I believe it was in 2012, had to annul their marriage because he found out that at the time that they got married, Janie Santana was married to at least one other man, but also probably married to at least 1 to 3 other men at the same time. Why does she do this? We're not sure. It could be money. I think that it's money. I think that it's definitely money. I don't know how she's getting this money from these men, but maybe she's meeting them online, finding out that they have some money. One of the men that she married, the guy who got the marriage annulled, he was in the military, so maybe she was hoping for some sort of, kickback from that. I don't know, but either way, it seems like Janie Santana has a lot of issues. She's action-packed with issues, and she needs to work on those issues. Preferably behind bars, in my opinion. In 2018, one of Rudy's cousins, Cassandra Lopez, called the Houston Police Department and told them, listen, my cousin Rudy, I know his mom says he's missing, but he's not, okay? He's been seen at Janie's house multiple times. So reportedly, Houston police officers went to the home of Janie Santana, but they claimed they saw no sign of Rudy. During a recent press conference, Lieutenant Christopher Zamora, a detective with the Houston Police Department Missing Persons Unit, claimed that HPD officers had multiple unspecified interactions with Rudy during the 8 years that he was allegedly missing. But during these interactions, they didn't know it was Rudy because both Janie and Rudy gave police false names and birth dates. So basically, Janie was like, oh, this is not Rudy, my son. This is my nephew. I don't know what names she gave the Houston Police Department, but she said, this is my nephew, and he's this old. And Rudy went along with this. Let's now fast forward to June 29th, 2023, when a person passing by a church found Rudy slumped outside, unresponsive and badly injured with cuts and wounds all over his body. But he also had older scars on his body. Now, not long before Rudy had been spotted by this passerby, he'd been seen at a nearby restaurant on surveillance, and he'd stood out to the staff at that restaurant because allegedly he was disheveled, he had a rough beard, he had no money, and he was incoherent. When he was found outside the church, Rudy was transported to the hospital for care, and his mother Janie was notified that her long-lost son had been found. After making her public statement about Rudy finally being home and being nonverbal and asking for privacy, Janie shared a photo of Rudy lying in a hospital bed. Now, this is a photo that her sisters have since claimed was not taken in 2023, but in 2012. And in fact, Rudy was hospitalized in 2012 for some issue with his heel. It's once again very unclear. And in the interview he's going to eventually give, he doesn't even really seem to know what that was about. It said something about cancer in his heel, but it seems almost like a little bit like Munchausen by proxy kind of thing. Yeah, We'll get there, but he was hospitalized in 2012. Not long after, being reunited with her son, Janie Santana apparently saw some bad comments about her and the situation on social media accounts of a local well-known Houston activist who goes by the name Grizzy Castillo. Grizzy is a street reporter who takes part in community events, and she helps to raise awareness on things going on in Houston that might not otherwise get attention. And her Facebook page currently has, I think, over 600,000 followers. So she's pretty legit, well-known, has a lot of influence in the area. So Janie contacted Grizzy due to the negative attention that she was getting on this Facebook page. And Grizzy said, quote, "I thought it was odd that's the first thing she tells me. Instead of, my son is hurting, he's at the hospital, she was more worried about how the media perceived her. She thought with me that I would tell everybody to lay off of her," end quote. Grizzy also claims that it's well known that Janie Santana is an internet catfish who uses other people's photos as her own, including the picture and the identity, I guess, of an up-and-coming country singer. Grizzy said, quote, "She created a family of catfish profiles to support her posts because nobody likes her stuff or comments back. So she's created a lot of fake profiles to circle her. She's using it for love, for personal gain, for money, whatever she needs it for. She's a very calculating person," end quote. So it looks like Janie probably made these accounts to sort of interact with her own profile online. But even on her own social media profile online, it doesn't even seem that Janie was using her actual own pictures of what she really looked like. Grizzy also met with Janie Santana in person at the hospital where Rudy was being treated, and this happened on Wednesday, July 5th. And apparently, Janie was very concerned with how she looked in real life versus how she purported herself to look on the internet. Grizzy Castillo said, quote, "She said, 'I'm worried. There are a bunch of cameras. I don't want them recording me.' She was very worried about being on camera because she's posting pictures of herself that are not hers," end quote. And if Janie Santana was using these fake profiles with her real name in order to financially benefit somehow, I can understand how she would probably not want her real picture to get out, because then anybody she was scamming would be like, "Oh, you're not who you say you are." But it was actually Grizzy Castillo who brought into the situation another well-known community activist known as Quinnell X, or Mr. X, and he's actually become the loudest voice in support of Rudy during this very confusing time. On July 5th, Janie and Rudy met with Houston police detectives in a hotel by the airport that Janie had escaped to, claiming she'd been getting threats and she didn't feel safe at home. Now, this is July 5th. This is, I think, at least or over a week after Rudy was found outside the church. The Houston Police Department waited to question this kid for a week after he got home after being missing for 8 years. And this kind of makes me question as to whether or not they actually thought he was missing for that 8 years, like they claimed they thought he was, because if you thought he'd been kidnapped and taken and held captive for 8 years, don't you think it would be of importance to question him about who his captors were pretty early on before they realize he's been found, because it's all over the media and they take off and escape and hide out? But anyways, Janie goes to this hotel because she's getting threats and she doesn't feel safe. And the night before she went to the hotel, so Tuesday, July 4th, neighbors had taken a video of Janie loading her car up in her driveway, claiming that she felt she was about to be arrested for hiding her son.
From a distance, neighbors took video of Rudy Farias' mother loading up a car in her driveway Tuesday night.
When he first went missing, he didn't report it to the police, and they're trying to say that he might have done some crimes, which he didn't, and now they want to arrest me because they said I was hiding him.
Now, on July 5th, during the meeting with police, Quinnell X arrived to the hotel, and he claimed that he met and spoke to Rudy without his mother, Janie, present, but in the presence of HPD Sergeant Stephen Jimenez. During their conversation, Quinnell claims that Rudy revealed to him specific details about the sexual and mental and, physical abuse, I guess, that Rudy had suffered at his mother's hands for the previous 8 years. According to Rudy, he'd been home that entire 8 years, and his mother had basically trapped him in the house and had been lying to everybody about who he was. After speaking to Rudy, Quinnell left the hotel and talked to reporters outside, and we're going to watch some portions of that interview now.
And I spent about an hour and 20 minutes one-on-one with Rudy and with one of the detectives. I heard horrific things from that young man. And I did not want him to see me start shedding tears, but I couldn't hold back the tears because of the things he was saying to us, the detective and myself. No child should ever be treated like that by your own mother. This young man said that when he initially ran away, he came back 2 days later, and she told him that he had to hide, that he was going to get in trouble, and they were going to arrest him for running away, and that he had to continue hiding. And so she hid him out for a while, then brought him back to the house and hid him in the home. And initially, whenever the investigators would come, she would hide him in the house. And he kept saying, I don't want her to go to prison. I don't want her to get in trouble. I don't want her to go to jail.
Okay, so this is important, right? Because Quinnell claims that Rudy did run away, but when he returned 2 days later, his mother, Janie, lied and manipulated him into believing that he had to hide from the police because they were going to arrest him for running away. She made him believe he'd broken some kind of law and that there were, law enforcement officers out there looking for him, not to help him, but to throw him behind bars. Now, this, according to Rudy's interview, is sort of true. There was something about a speeding ticket, and she made him feel like he was going to get in a lot of trouble for that, et cetera, et cetera. And this has a twofold manipulative and controlling effect when used by an abuser towards their victim. First, Rudy's going to go along with hiding and using different names and pretending to be someone else because he thinks that the police are after him, so he feels like he has to be in hiding. And it's also going to make him distrust law enforcement officials. So if they show up to question Janie and Rudy because people are saying that Rudy's home and not missing, Rudy's going to go along with this and pretend to be someone else because he's going to see the police as people who want to hurt him, people who are going to get him into trouble, so he'll be less likely to ask for help from them and more likely to go along with his mother's plan of keeping him hidden and anonymous. And in his interview, he says something very similar to the point where, after I lost my brother, my mother was the only person I had, and I depended on her very much to the point where, I just followed everything she did because she was all I had. Now let's continue on with the interview, and this clip starts off with Mr. X saying that he and the HPD detective asked Rudy why had he run away, and they don't mean why did he run away in 2015, but why did he run away in 2023, when he was found outside the church, because reportedly on May 27th, 2023, Janie Santana had reported her BMW missing, but she told the police she didn't know who had taken it, and the BMW was found crashed and totaled some days later. But according to neighbors, Janie knew very well who had taken that BMW. It was her son, who, by the way, they didn't know as Rudy because he went by the name of Dolph, and Janie told everybody in the neighborhood that Dolph was her nephew. But apparently Rudy, aka Dolph, was the one who had taken the BMW and crashed it in an attempt to run away from her, which is why he's found kind of all bloody and wounded and in need of medical care when he's found outside the church. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this car accident later on in the video.
And so we asked him, why did you run away? And he said he just got tired of her not respecting his boundaries. And she said that he wanted his own life. And his exact word was, I was tired of living like a slave. She would take him to work with her, and he would do the required work she was supposed to do. And a lot of the responsibilities of her job was on him.
Okay, so from what I could gather, Janie Santana worked some sort of overnight security job. And from what Mr. X is saying, Rudy claimed that each night his mother would take him with her to work, but she would make him do the bulk of her job duties. Now, this claim has also been backed up by a neighbor of Janie's.
Neighbors tell me Farias has been living with his mother this entire time, but they know him by the name Dolph. But did you ever notice anything suspicious over there?
No, like when he talked to us, he doesn't like say too much on who he really is. We just know that he lives down here with his mom. He goes to work with her like around 6 p.m. to like maybe 7 or 8 in the morning.
As we will find out, this claim will also later be supported by Rudy, who dropped that surprise interview on all of us. And Rudy said he worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, but his mother only paid him $60, I think, a week, which is crazy. That is the definition of like human trafficking, which is funny because Janie's saying, oh, I think he's fallen into the hands of human traffickers. And, you know, so often we mistakenly just think of human trafficking as, you know, sexual slavery, but it's also just slavery in general, right? A lot of these trafficking victims are taken and then forced to work for their captors for very low wages or like nothing at all. So that's definitely what's happened here. And as we're going to find out, the police are like, oh, we're not going to bring charges against Janie. Like, there's no charges to bring against her. There's a charge right there, in my opinion, and like, you know, in the opinion of the law. So this neighbor of Janie's says that she sees Rudy leave with his mother to go to work around 6 in the evening, and then they return early the next morning. So like I said, there does seem to be a lot of validity to these claims from multiple sources. Let's continue on with the interview.
He went on to say that what troubled him the most was her crossing his personal space boundaries. He said that she would make him sleep in the bed with her. And he said that she made him play daddy. He said that he didn't like getting in the bed with her. That he would try to sneak out of the bed and sometime hide under the bed, but she told him he had to be her husband. That's a damn shame, man. The reason why he was left, he was just tired of her crossing his boundaries. When he would shower, she would come and pull the shower curtain back and stare at him, and then she would make him bathe her with the soap. And he ran away this time because he was tired. She would ask him to play daddy. She told him that he had to be the husband. She would force him to sleep in the bed with her. And he was forced to sleep at times in the beds with no clothes on.
Was anything physically done?
Yes, but I don't want to talk about the kissing and all of that stuff.
But he was telling you that there was some sort of sexual action that was happening between him and his...
Let me ask you a question. If your mother tongue kissing you in the bed with her naked, what the hell is that? I mean, damn, do we have to go that far? That's what happened. This is sick.
What else?
This ain't normal. This is sick.
What else?
And I'm honestly so glad we were able to see this reporter who asked the question, because when he heard Quinnell's answer, which once again, the response was perfect. Like, yeah, if that's happening, that's inappropriate. That's sick. So the reporter, he like raised his eyebrows, like head nod, like, yeah, I think it's safe to say if that's what's happening, that is sick. That's not right. If that's what's happening, Rudy was being sexually abused by his mother. Quinnell also claimed that Janie was giving her son drugs, basically keeping him drugged up so that she could control, manipulate, and abuse him.
A little boy said she was the one providing drugs to him for years. Hallucination drugs, mushrooms, etc. And that young man's body have scars all over it. Slice wounds from here up, from which was forearm to his wrist. All type of scars on this kid. And he said that she often locked him in the room, that she would give him the drugs and lock him in the room. And there's a whole lot of mental health issues there, I believe, induced because of the drugs that this young man was given.
This is a man in his mid-20s. People might wonder, why not run away from this situation? Why not get yourself out of it? Did he give you any explanation about that?
I honestly believe, based on what he said to us, she was drugging the hell out this kid. And she convinced him that he was in trouble for initially running away, and that law enforcement wanted to arrest him and put him in jail for running away. She had convinced him that all type of agencies were looking for him to put him in jail.
These reporters literally act like if you're over the age of 18, you just can't be a victim anymore, right? And I'm not saying they're acting like that, but they're asking the questions, I guess, that some people would ask, like, he was an adult. Why didn't he just leave? Why didn't he, do something about it? But it's like, being an adult doesn't immediately just like save you from becoming a victim. Being an adult doesn't immediately save you from being manipulated and brainwashed by a controlling abuser. It happens to people all the time. And we wouldn't ask a battered wife, oh, why don't you just leave? Because we understand that it's more complex than that. There's more gray areas. There's a lot of mental manipulation and abuse and emotional abuse. So why are we asking this man, who, by the way, has been known to have special needs, right? Has been known to have maybe some developmental delays, according to his cousin, why he didn't just leave? Like, if he could have left, don't you think he would have? And I think that Mr. X is absolutely right here about why Rudy didn't leave, with the double-pronged attack of convincing Rudy that he was being pursued by the police and him not being in his right mind because of the drugs that she was feeding him, allegedly. That would be very difficult to break free from your abuser, especially, as Rudy himself will say, she was the only person he had. Now, once again, the claims that Rudy was always under the influence of some sort of drug is confirmed and supported by neighbor Keisha Ross. Keisha said that she'd moved from Houston to Fort Worth in the year 2000, so she hadn't even been there in Houston when Rudy had been reported missing in 2015. But she moved back to Houston and into Rudy's neighborhood in 2022, and 3 months after she moved in, she met Rudy, but he was going by the name Dolph. So Dolph, aka Rudy, would come and hang out at her house all the time. He would chill with her cousin, her son, her daughter. And she said that whenever he was there and his mom would call his cell phone, he wouldn't answer. Keisha also said that she never saw Dolph, aka Rudy, with a sober mind.
So what was your reaction when you heard Rudy was found slumped over outside of a church last week and then taken to the hospital? What went through your heart and your mind first?
He may have been slumped over due to being on some type of drug, because like I told people, every time I saw him, I never saw him with a sober mind. He was always saying that he needed some mushrooms or shrooms to get high, and he smoked marijuana, and he was always high. He was never sober. But when he would come, what was like getting to me was like, you could tell there was something wrong with him, because he was like always, he was like, if he came down here and she called his phone, he wouldn't answer.
Now remember, in her public statement, Janie Santana had claimed that Rudy was nonverbal. He was so traumatized he wasn't speaking and he couldn't tell anyone what had happened to him. And Quinnell also says this, but he says Rudy was only silent when his mother was around.
When she was in the room, he wouldn't say nothing. He wouldn't say one word when she was in the room. But the minute she left the room and we were allowed to talk to a young man, and he asked, he said, can I speak with Mr. X by myself? Can I talk to Quinnell by myself? And the detective was like, well, can one of us stay in the room? And he was like, okay, but I'll talk to him. When she left, when he first came here, he was holding on to her. He wouldn't talk to them. He wouldn't say one word to anybody. Like he was petrified. But the minute he got alone by himself, he slowly calmed down. And he slowly began to talk very coherently and specific details.
At any point during this process today, did you see the mother detained by HPD?
They took her to another room and kept her there for a minute after he had confided with us what was said. I know they were on the phone with the DA's office and their superiors about this case, but I want everybody to know something. This young boy was not kidnapped by some strangers and he got away and they found him. That's not the case here.
You know, this happened on Thursday, and we're nearly a week later, and investigators waited almost a week to speak to him. Hearing the story that you heard, is it a concern that they waited this long to hear from him, given the story that you were told? It seems like he's had 8 years of dealing with this, and now another week.
I was shocked that they have not done more. I was shocked that they had not executed a search warrant on the home. I was shocked by that. And I said, don't you all think you need to get busy and execute a search warrant on that home? And the young man made it crystal clear to us that that's where he was, in the house. But he was living under this fake assumed name.
You think police failed in this situation?
Oh, big time. No doubt about it. Absolutely they did. Because there were several instances where calls were made about him to law enforcement, and they did not properly follow up and follow through based on the history of that address, because she hadn't changed addresses. I can't say at what state their investigation is, but what I can say, it ain't no way in hell that woman shouldn't be locked up immediately, and that boy needs to go to the best drug rehab and best psychological mental health facility that we can find for him. He's a good kid. He's a good kid. That kid was just severely abused. Based on what that young man said to me in front of the detective, I don't see why she's not in handcuffs right now. I don't see why she's not in handcuffs right now.
So in that clip, Quinnell X is saying that it's a travesty that the Houston Police Department allowed Rudy to go back home with his mother for a week before speaking to them both. And he doesn't understand why search warrants haven't been executed at the home where this abuse allegedly happened. He doesn't understand why Janie Santana wasn't already under arrest. And I completely agree. No matter what the truth ends up being, I think objectively, we can say that the Houston Police Department failed miserably here.
Is she aware of these that the son told you?
Yes, she's aware. And then she goes back in there and tries to tell him, and she don't even know that was recorded. Tell him that you made it all up, that it was just a lie.
Quinnell is now saying that after he and the detective spoke to Rudy, Rudy's mother, Janie, went back in the room and, not knowing she was being recorded, told Rudy he had made it up and lied. Now, this is not the first time that Quinnell X mentions that these interactions were recorded, and it's not clear as to who recorded them. Did he record them? Did the Houston police record them? Or both? But we'll get to that in a minute because we aren't done with the twists and turns of this case. On July 6th, the Houston Police Department held a press conference to confirm that Rudy Farias had never been missing and that he'd returned home the day after he'd been reported missing in 2015. But it's not as if they knew this the whole time, right? It's not as if the whole 8 years they knew he wasn't missing. They didn't know. They were tricked by Janie and Rudy.
He was recently identified as having previous HPD interactions, meaning that he made contact with patrol officers out on the street. However, during these contacts, fictitious names and date of births were given, misleading the officers, and Rudy would remain missing. In fact, both Janie, Rudy's mother, and Rudy himself gave fictitious names while interacting with various patrol officers. After investigators talked with him yesterday, it was discovered that Rudy returned home the following day on March 8th, 2015. The mother, Janie, continued to deceive police by remaining adamant that Rudy was still missing. She alleged her nephew was a person friends and family were seen coming and going. However, we disputed that. Currently, the DA has declined any charges at this time for making fictitious reports and failure to ID.
It really feels like throughout this press conference that these guys do not know what the hell they're doing. And then the Houston Police Department claimed that during Rudy's interview with the detective and with Quinell X present, no claims of sexual abuse had been reported.
Now, based on Rudy's interview, there were no reports of sexual abuse reported. If there is a disclosure made, we will continue to investigate. Currently, the investigation is active, and there are new leads coming in. We'll continue to follow those leads. We do take all allegations seriously, and any new information or facts that we receive will be investigated.
So who you're going to see in this clip is Police Chief Troy Finner. And I'm not going to lie, he's kind of a douche. I don't know if it's just the landscape of this investigation. Like, did this case specifically bring out the douchiness in this police chief? I don't know. But in general, specifically his demeanor throughout this press conference is very defensive and at times dismissive of reporters when they're asking objectively valid questions. So a reporter is going to ask about the allegations made by Quinell X. And Chief Finner sort of holds up his hand to his fellow police officers and he's like, I'm going to handle this. I've got this. Like they all can't be trusted to handle these nosy reporters correctly. Chief Finner has to handle it. King douche. I'm sorry. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he's super douchey in this press conference.
We heard from activist Quinell X, and he made some shocking allegations that he was in the room with a detective, and he heard from Rudy firsthand. He said that there were sexual abuse allegations and that he was drugged by his mother. From what you just said today, are you saying that the activist was lying?
Basically, what we're saying is our investigation is our investigation, and we treat it the same. We're going to, our investigators were in the room, and basically, you know, what they heard and what they interviewed, that's what we attest to in our offense reports and our investigations. And I'm not here, neither are they here to question anybody's integrity, but our integrity with the Houston Police Department stands, and we're going to report and put in offense reports what a victim or potential victim tells us, okay?
I just think it's funny. He's like, our investigation is our investigation and our investigators, and it's just like a word salad. Like, you're really saying things, but what you're trying to do is not say things, right? You're saying things that just make no sense just to fill up the air, but you're not actually directly answering these questions. And then the reporter presses Chief Finner, and she asks, just to be clear, the detective in the room with Mr. X and Rudy didn't hear any allegations of sexual abuse. And Chief Finner directs Sergeant Stephen Jimenez to step up to the podium because this is the detective, remember, who was in the room when Mr. X claims that these allegations were made by Rudy. And Sergeant Jimenez responds kind of vaguely. And like I said, they do this a lot during this press conference, more than I've ever seen in a police press conference. They don't directly answer questions. They sort of sidestep and dance around a direct response, but they never actually land on a direct response.
Clear, in that room, the detective did not hear anything about sexual abuse allegations.
Go ahead.
Can you just clear that up?
Yeah, Sergeant Stephen Jimenez. Yes, I interviewed him, and no, there was no. You know, I'm trained to listen for probable cause. I'm trained to listen for statements that can help me get charges or move forward with a case. And no, there was no statements made during this investigation so far, no.
Thank you. Next question. Go ahead, Maria.
Can that be answered?
Wait a minute. Go ahead. We get it.
Sergeant Jimenez does not answer the question really at all. I'm trained to listen to statements that can give me probable cause. That's not an answer. And then Chief Finner is like, we get it, next question, as if everyone should just be satisfied with that vague, weirdly worded, awkward response. Another reporter once again tries to clarify. You're saying there's no reports of sexual assault or abuse. And the police say that is correct. From Rudy Farias. That's what they say. So I think they're also not trying to be vague here. They're saying Mr. X has made these allegations, but Rudy Farias has not. But then the reporter asked, was there a sexual relationship between Rudy and his mother? And once again, the answer to this is confusing and sort of contrary to what the HPD's been saying throughout this press conference.
So we don't release any type of information related to sexual assaults. That's just state law. I can't comment on that.
Go ahead.
So you can't release information about sexual assaults? That's state law. So are you saying that there was a sexual assault? Because if there wasn't, then why would you be telling us that you can't release information on a sexual assault? And why, when they asked if there was a sexual relationship between Rudy and his mother, did you answer in that way? It doesn't make any sense. So a reporter says to Chief Finner, listen, I know that you value transparency, and we're going to be putting this on the news, and people are going to have questions. So, like, do you want to be transparent as possible? And Chief Finner reacts very defensively to this.
I know you believe in transparency, and for the public, we're going to put this on the news, and it's going to cause more questions, because yesterday we hear from the activist who makes these shocking allegations, and as a reporter who was there, I did see him myself go in and out of the room, so it was clear that he had some sort of communication.
Transparency doesn't come in front and maintaining the integrity of the investigation, and that's where my transparency stops. But and I'm gonna. This is the last question I'm gonna ask about the activists or anybody else. You know, we're going to follow our investigation, and we treat it the same. Everybody has a role in society, and we respect everybody, including our activists. But the integrity of the investigation is number one, and we're going to maintain that. Okay?
Going inside that room, did that jeopardize the investigation by allowing?
I don't think so. Go ahead. Anybody?
Do you know where's Rudy at this moment and his mom?
Yes, we do. Rudy is safe. He is with his mother by choice.
He's an adult.
Yeah.
He's a 25-year-old man.
Right. Hey, we're going to get a few more. Mario right here, and then we're going to work our way down. Probably 4 more, and we're going to wrap.
You used the word a minute ago in describing Rudy as a victim. We know that
I said potential victim, and I want to be respectful on that. Yep.
He disappeared when he was a young man.
So Chief Finner says transparency doesn't come before the integrity of the investigation, and he's not going to be answering any more questions about this activist. And at the end, first of all, anytime I see somebody at a press conference interrupt the person asking the question, I find it to be incredibly disrespectful, because she's saying, like, listen, we're putting this on the news. These very real allegations were made, and now you guys are kind of like dancing around it. So, like, can you give us something that answers directly one way or the other what people are going to be asking? And he interrupts her because he doesn't like this line of questioning. But it's like, what did you expect kind of line of questioning you were going to get at this press conference? And at the end, when the reporter's still trying to ask questions about this, Chief Finner's incredibly dismissive. He cuts her off and he's like, anyone else have a question? Anyone? Anybody? Literally anybody besides this woman who's asking questions that I clearly do not want to answer. Anyone? 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 Like, it's so rude, so disrespectful, so dismissive. It really rubbed me the wrong way. After the Houston Police Department put on their weird press conference, Quinnell X put on a press conference of his own. I believe he was right in the front yard of Janie Santana, Rudy's mother. And Quinnell doubled down on his claims, calling the Houston Police Department a bunch of dirty liars, specifically Sergeant Jimenez, who was in the room when Rudy allegedly made these claims.
Liars.
Oh, man.
That man heard everything that I heard.
From my mom.
I'm standing here speaking the truth of what Rudy said to me. And I'm standing here fighting for that young man. I begged the detective, don't allow Rudy to go home with this woman. Don't allow Rudy to leave with this woman. I begged them to do something to stop him. I said to the detective, all 3 of them, after what you and I just heard in that room with that young man, how in the hell can you allow that boy to leave with that woman? And the detective said to me, because he is an adult, there's not a lot we can do about it. The detective, I also said to him, I said, sir, you know everything that young boy just told us. You cannot allow him to leave with her. That young boy told us how she would lock him in a room and leave him locked in there. That young boy told us how she would give him drugs, mushrooms as he called them. That young boy talked about how the drugs would cause him to hallucinate. She lied and told me when I first talked to her that the Hispanic young man that was seen here was her ex-boyfriend. And then when we were in the meeting with the detectives, She said it was her nephew. She'd been telling lies for years. So you mean to tell me, Houston Police Department, this woman can tell multiple lies to law enforcement. She can raise money all on GoFundMe pages. I talked with the investigator for at length today who worked on this case for years, the private investigator. She would raise money for Miss Jenny. And one time she said when she raised the money for her, she only came for 5 minutes, picked up the $2,000 and drove off and left and didn't even thank the people who was raising the money on behalf of Rudy to look for him. I cannot believe and I refuse to believe that there's not a single charge that they can come up with to put this woman in jail so a judge can tell her you can have no contact with the victim just like you do in domestic violence cases. On yesterday, when the question was asked, was there a sexual relationship? The sergeant lied in his response. And then the next question was there a sexual relationship between the mother and her son? They refused to answer that question and said he's a victim and we protect all sexual assault victims. See, they know what I'm saying is the truth. That dirty, low-down damn cop was right there with me when Rudy said everything that he said. Just go back and look at the press conference. Why didn't you say, well, from what we know, there was no sexual relationship? You so freely saying that there was no sexual abuse reported. So what are you suggesting? Because he was of age, he gave consent? Is that what you're trying to suggest? Let me tell you something. Rudy is a victim. And for HPD to suggest on any level that that young boy may be involved in this scheme, that's wrong. That boy wasn't involved in no scheme. That woman a straight up monster. Telling you straight up. That's what that woman is. Rudy, in my opinion, his safety is in danger.
What Quinnell said here is also important because it did sound as if the police were sort of grouping Rudy in with his mother, as if they had both lied about his identity. During the press conference, Lieutenant Christopher Zamora sort of suggested that Rudy may have committed a criminal offense by giving the police false names. And former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindagger, once again, cool name, Jennifer Coffindagger. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindagger. I could make a whole Jennifer Garner alias series out of an FBI agent named Jennifer Coffindagger. But anyways, she's recently spoken out about this on her Twitter account, saying, quote, "It seems law enforcement was indicating Rudy could be held criminally liable for lying about his identity during police interaction. Does law enforcement think he is complicit with his mom in keeping up this charade? Does law enforcement need to be reminded that he was found unconscious behind a church? It was over 93 degrees in Houston. He was hospitalized." End quote. Former FBI agent Coffindagger is also perplexed as to why no charges have been brought against Janie Santana. I'm also perplexed, even to this moment, to this day, why she has not been arrested or brought in some way, shape, or form. Now, when I first watched Quinnell X speaking during this press conference, I got goosebumps. And at one point, I found myself standing up and clapping because he gets heated towards the end there. And he's absolutely right. And he said, HPD, don't try me.
That woman should be under the jail. I'm telling you for a fact what this young man said to me. And I'm going to leave it at this. HPD, don't try me. Because I got it on record what he said to me. But for the sake of the victim, I'll respect that young man's dignity as my lawyers told me to. But if you try me with your lies again, I'll let everybody hear what that young man said. But I want to respect that young man's privacy, because what he went through should be for him to expose to a therapist and not for me to share with the public. But I covered my bases.
So Quinnell X says he has it on record, what Rudy said in that room, which makes me believe that he was able to somehow record the conversation with Rudy, which, if that's true, would literally break this case wide open and expose the Houston police as being dishonest and not protecting a victim. Because if they heard what Quinnell is claiming that Rudy said, and they still sent Rudy home with his mother, that is negligent. I don't care if Rudy is 5 or 25 or 65. He clearly has some issues. He's clearly experienced some trauma. His cousin said that he was 17, but he had the mental age of 10. And if he's been subjected to 8 years of this type of abuse, or any type of abuse, really, he's not in the right state of mind to make these decisions for himself. He can't say, like, yeah, let me go home with my abuser, because Stockholm Syndrome. He can't protect himself. He needs help, and he needs people who are in the right position of authority and in a better mental state than he is in to make those decisions for him, at least temporarily, until the police can get to the bottom of what's really happening, right? So the police could say, hey, for the meantime, don't go home with your mom because we got to figure out what the hell's happening here. Why don't you stay, in a safe place, or they'll put him in a safe house, or they'll find a friend or something, until they at least question her. And honestly, like I said, just in what Rudy's claimed in his interview, which I believe he did say in front of the Houston Police Department, all of the stuff he claimed in that interview should have prevented the police from sending him home with his mother. And I guess my question would be, why would the Houston Police Department lie about what Rudy said in that room? Why are they being so cagey about it? And Quinnell X has his own theory about that.
I think HPD is embarrassed that they encountered Rudy on several occasions and did not do their due diligence. When they came to this address, had they done just some basic fundamental research, they would have seen that a child went missing from this address just years before. When they encountered him on other occasions, they didn't do their due diligence. They let that boy keep going with his mother. When neighbors would call in, when family would call in and say, hey, look, we got this tip about Rudy, they never even followed through. And in fact, they have to tell the whole world now, why, when Rudy was found, you waited 8 days. 8 days to question him. In fact, they wasn't going to even question Rudy. Let me be clear about that. They had decided that they were not going to question Rudy after the mother told them he's nonverbal. The mother told me and the detectives right in front of Grizzy, oh, he's nonverbal, he can't talk. And so I pulled up a chair and I sat down next to him, and he was holding his mother's leg and crouched all over, and she had covered him up with a blanket.
Mr. X has got charisma, man, that's for sure. Don't try him. Like, I could watch him speak all day. He's got charisma, and he genuinely seems to be sincere and earnest, and he definitely seems to care. So don't try him, HPD, because things are sketchy enough with Janie Santana and the whole situation. I believe him. And there's literally, as far as I can tell, no reason for him to lie. But if the Houston Police Department dropped the ball here, if they allowed Rudy to be victimized in this way by his mother for 8 years and then sent him home with her, they surely do have something to hide. And there surely is a reason for them to not be 100% upfront and transparent, which the police chief says he only cares about transparency when it's not compromising the investigation. But I'm not sure how taking Janie Santana into custody, keeping her son Rudy safe from her until you figure out what's going on, asking Janie questions, serving a search warrant for her home, and checking things out, I'm not sure how that would compromise the investigation. In fact, that doesn't sound like the way you compromise an investigation. It sounds like the way you conduct one. Family members of Rudy have come forward and revealed incriminating details about his mother, Janie Santana, who also happens to be their family member, right? So in an interview with Fox 7, Rudy's cousin, Michelle Rodriguez, said the police are covering up what they knew to be true years ago, what they didn't want to ever get out. She said, quote, prior to Rudy's disappearance, his so-called disappearance, his mother had been seen by my late grandma causing abuse to Rudy, sexually, physically, mentally. This did not just start when Janie reported Rudy missing. Janie needs to be brought in, end quote. And remember, the husband and wife PI team said that they thought it was odd that when they were investigating Rudy's disappearance in 2015, Janie wouldn't let them talk to her mother, Rosa, who, sadly, I believe, passed away at the age of 85 or so in 2020, but was living with Janie and Rudy at the time of Rudy's disappearance in 2015. Rudy's aunt and Janie's sister, Pauline, also accused the Houston Police Department of covering for Janie because apparently Janie knows a lot of people in the police department. And I suppose that would be because of Rudy's father, who I think had been a 21-year veteran of the HPD when he took his own life. Cassandra Lopez, another one of Rudy's cousins, has also said that they all always suspected Rudy was never missing.
It's just we've always, in our hearts, knew that he wasn't really missing.
During those 8 years, his cousin Cassandra Lopez says she called 911 in 2018 after family members saw Farias at his mother's home. She says their grandmother told her she spoke with Rudy often.
And how did those conversations go when she would talk about Rudy?
She would just say, I saw Rudy, he came to check on me, and, we just said hello and have their little conversation. She never went into detail, but she would say she saw him.
HPD says officers responded but didn't find him.
And I want to talk about the BMW being stolen, the vehicle that Rudy allegedly used to get away from his mother before he crashed and injured himself, which is how he was found in front of the church at the end of June 2023. To me, this is further proof that Janie Santana has been lying, because she claimed that she didn't know who had stolen the car, but neighbors tell a different story. The same neighbors that Janie instructed to not talk to the press after Rudy made headlines on June 29th. Like, can you believe the audacity, the balls of Janie Santana to be like, I know I've been telling you this kid's name is Dolph and that he's my nephew. And she was still telling them that. She was still telling them that even after Rudy was found. And she's like, no, this isn't the same kid that's been here for 8 years. This isn't the kid that that's been to your house, that's, hung out with you. That's my son that was found after being missing for 8 years. But the person that's been with me and living with me is Dolph, my nephew. And of course, they look the same because they're cousins. They look similar. But she literally told them, you guys don't understand what's going on here. Just don't talk to the press. Of course, she didn't want them to talk to the press, just like she didn't want Rudy to talk to the police, just like she didn't want anybody to know that Rudy was not missing, but actually living in her house, basically trapped there, whether it was a physical cage or a mental cage, basically trapped there.
How did he end up in the church?
We still can't. He admit that he had took mushrooms, okay? And 2 weeks before this, or a week, not even official, whole 2 weeks, her car was stolen, okay? When her car was stolen, she didn't know how the car was stolen, but the keys were in the car. And he stole the car. That's when he got into the accident in the car. And it was him that got into the accident in that car.
So he had been coming to my house since 3 months after I moved here, clean up until May 27th, when he actually so-called went missing from his home with his mother's BMW. He took it and he totaled it, and she told police that she didn't know who took her car, but she knew that he took her car because he was down here at my house earlier in the day with that car, and then he left. After he left, we hadn't talked to him. He turned his phone off, and we had been calling him to, because she had been calling us, asking us, have we heard from him? Have we talked to him? And we were saying no. So Sunday, the day before the 4th of July, he come walking by my house earlier that morning around 7 o'clock. I want to say 7:30 or close to 8 o'clock. He had on some white basketball shorts, some flip-flops, no shirt, and he had some Band-Aids on him like he had went to the hospital or gave plasma or something, and a towel wrapped over him. And he walked to his house. And then later on that day, I learned that he was supposed to be missing. And when I looked at the thing, my daughter pulled it up and it said he had been missing since 2015. I wasn't here in 2015, so I knew nothing about that because I watch the news every now and then. I don't watch it like that. So I never knew anything about that. That day, I discovered that he's supposed to be missing since 2015. I say, how was he missing since 2015? And I met him in 2022. It's a bunch of people that's been in my home that knows him and they're not even living with me anymore, but they can tell you that they know a Mexican guy named Dolph. And if you show them a picture of him, they'll tell you that's who they know, because that's who we know. She's saying we talked to her nephew. The number that we had for her son, so-called son, is not his number. That was her nephew number. I told her all she have to do is bring her nephew to my presence and ask her nephew what's inside of my house. Dolph know, because he's been inside of my house. And I told her they run around saying that this is her nephew that everybody has seen. Why isn't a lie detector test, or nobody has went into the home and took DNA evidence at the house? Because the boy had been living there since I've been at my home.
So what is actually going on here? No matter which way you cut it, in my opinion, this woman, Janie Santana, is not innocent. At this point, we don't have proof of these sexual abuse allegations, but we know that the whole time she claimed Rudy was missing, he'd been with her. We know that now. And what would be her motive to keep him anonymous and not tell anyone that he had returned literally 2 days after he'd run away? And why did he run away in the first place back in 2015? Was it because she was abusing him and he had to get away, but then he realized he had no place to go? Was it because he was depressed due to the death of his brother and the death of his father? It could be a little bit of both. We don't really know. We're not sure. But remember, family members did say that it was after Rudy's brother died and after his father died and after he became depressed that Janie sort of like took control and took over his life. Now, you could say that maybe Janie did this for money, you know, the whole GoFundMe thing, but that only raised $2,000, and GoFundMe has now like banned her from the site. I don't know why GoFundMe thinks that like banning people from their site is like this effective way of punishing them for, you know, being grifters and raising money for fake causes. Like, that's not any kind of repercussion, because she could just have a GoFundMe started for her by any one of her lackeys. So you could say that Janie did it for money. But I don't think she's been making money off of his disappearance for the last 8 years. Like, besides that initial GoFundMe and fundraising efforts, I don't think she's been making money off of his disappearance, at least. So what else would her motive have been? Well, it sounds like she's got him working for her in this like slave labor role. So that does stem back to money. But that is also abuse, right? So if she wasn't abusing him, if she wasn't doing things that she didn't want other people to find out about, whether it's physical, mental, or sexual abuse, why would she lie about his identity, force him to lie about his identity, and keep him captive in the house? Why would she do that if she wasn't doing anything wrong? Now, the last I heard, Rudy was staying with a friend in East Houston since July 5th, but a neighbor of this friend, this neighbor wishes to remain anonymous, has claimed that Rudy isn't much safer there at this house because this person happens to be a friend of Rudy's mother, Janie Santana. Rudy's aunt, Pauline, initially claimed that Rudy didn't want to see Janie and wasn't taking her calls, but this neighbor also saw Janie pull up there in a rental car on Saturday, July 8th, and Rudy was allegedly spending time with her. Once again, Rudy has come out with an interview and he says he wants nothing to do with Janie. He doesn't want to see her. He doesn't want to talk about her. He doesn't want her in his life. He would like his own life for once. In his entire 25 years of being alive, he's never been in control of himself. He's never been able to do what he wants, and now that is what he wants to do. Now, Pauline, who also claims to not want to have anything to do with her sister Janie, also visited the house that Rudy is staying at with bags of clothes that she had bought and brought for Rudy. And apparently there was some kind of altercation where Pauline wasn't allowed to see Rudy at first, and Pauline and this homeowner were apparently in the middle of the street yelling at each other, and the cops were called. Even though eventually Rudy did accept the clothes and the things that his aunt had brought him, she was hoping he would leave and come and live with her, but he decided to stay there, at least for the meantime. I don't know if he's changed his mind since then. And like I said, I was going to tell you that this was all I had for you, but as I wrapped up my research and prepared to record this video, Fox 26 Houston dropped a random surprise interview with Rudy Farias himself. And Rudy is now able to speak for himself, although he has his face and body blurred during this, I think it's like a 28-minute interview. And basically, I'm going to do a whole separate video on this interview after I've had time to analyze it and not just listen to the words, but actually listen to what he's saying, because he does some he does some strange talking about colors and how when you see the color white, you feel this way, and you can clearly tell that he's been on some drugs, especially hallucinogenics, and that he's been in almost like fantasy land because he's been by himself and he's been controlled by his mother. And he also contradicts himself in this interview a few times. He admits that he felt manipulated and brainwashed by his mother. It broke my heart to hear him talk about how he felt that Janie was the only person he had after he lost his brother. He literally says, I was held against my will. It feels like Stockholm syndrome, like when you fall in love with your captor. And to hear him describe it, what he's experiencing to me does sound a lot like PTSD. He also said he worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and he was getting paid $60 a week. So like I said, if they can't get Janie for anything else, they surely can get her for that, because that does sound a lot like human trafficking in the form of slave labor that is illegal. Now, when asked about the sexual abuse claims, Rudy said, yeah, my mother did make me sleep in her bed sometimes, but I can't really remember why. And she would often push my boundaries and make me uncomfortable. But then he said, no, nothing sexual happened, nothing like that. If it had happened, I would say so. Unfortunately, I don't know if he necessarily would, because there's a degree of shame associated with that, I think, especially as a man, especially when it's your mother. And he does mention, and you can tell in his voice that it really bothers him, how Janie didn't respect his boundaries. So, for instance, if that shower story that Quinnell X told is true, and the whole bathing story is true, that's very concerning. If they were in bed together naked and she was like kissing him on the mouth, that's very concerning. So it may not have escalated to the level of like actual penetrative sex, but that doesn't mean that Rudy was not sexually abused. And I'm not saying he was. I'm saying it doesn't mean he wasn't. And he might not know that he was, or he might not be willing to admit it at this point publicly. He does say things like, you know, there were things happening and my boundaries were being pushed and I felt very uncomfortable, but I didn't really know what was happening and I didn't have anybody to explain to me what was happening. Rudy's been incredibly traumatized and, you know, he does feel he has Stockholm syndrome. He just might be really worried about talking about this publicly. He might not want to get his mother in trouble because he's still probably very much worried about her and codependent on her. Stockholm syndrome isn't something you get over overnight. It's not something that you break free of within, 24 hours or a week or a month or even a year sometimes. And he says when it comes to the real small details, he doesn't remember. And he wants to remember the facts, not the facts filtered through his mother. So he clearly admits that she's distorted his perception of reality. So can we really believe that she never crossed a line with him? I don't believe that. Even if there was no sexual abuse, she still abused him. She manipulated him. She held him captive in a way. And he states in this interview, like, oh no, she never like locked me up or like put chains on me. But then when the reporter asks like what happened when family members came over, he says she locked me in a room. And it was so sad because he said, I could hear everyone laughing and carrying on and having a good time and, talking to each other outside my door, but I was locked in and it was just so hard because I couldn't be a part of it. If you were like physically locked in a room, you were physically held captive. She kept you there because she didn't want the relatives to know that you were still there. She wanted them to think you were like kidnapped and gone. So we are going to do a video of Rudy's interview, like talking about it and analyzing it, and that'll be out very shortly after this. And that's all I have for you now at this point, legitimately. I don't know still what to believe, even though we've heard from Mr. X and we've heard from Rudy Farias and we've heard from the Houston Police Department. We haven't heard from Janie, which I expect we probably won't be hearing from her, but we've heard pretty much every side of the story. And at the end of the day, I still think Houston Police Department did a horrendous job. They went to the house. They had multiple interactions with Rudy while he was missing. And they had people, family members, literally calling and saying, Rudy's not missing, he's there. So why did they at no time follow up? Why didn't they go there and when Janie was like, no, this isn't Rudy, this is my nephew? And why didn't they say like, well, let's get a DNA test or let's, see a more current picture of Rudy and compare it to what this person looks like, or let's do fingerprints or something like that. Like, why didn't they follow up? Why did they just believe her? when her son was missing and nothing that she ever said during the initial 2015 timeframe when Rudy went missing, none of that even added up. And if it didn't add up to the PIs, I can't imagine that trained police detectives in the missing persons unit of the HPD heard what Janie was saying and heard her stories, and they were like, yeah, this sounds legit. This sounds absolutely valid. If just like, regular PIs are picking up on this stuff, why is the Houston Police Department not? And honestly, it seems like they're very defensive about that now because they know they dropped the ball, they know they messed up, and they're trying to mitigate the damage that it does to them and their reputation at this point. But it is damaging to them and their reputation. So that's all I have for you now. Let me know what you think about this absolutely crazy case. I really can't wait to hear what you think about it. I will do a video about Rudy's interview as well as any follow-ups. Hopefully Janie will be speaking soon. Hopefully Janie will be arrested soon. Because if Rudy said this stuff that he said in this interview to the police in his interview with them, Janie should be arrested still. Like, what? This is not hard to understand. So hopefully she's arrested soon, at least arrested to be questioned. And yeah, we'll keep up with the updates on it. Like the video if you liked it. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. Throw me a comment. Tell me what you think. Say hi. I love interacting with you guys in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, and stay safe. And I'll see you very soon. Bye.
Battle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's killing you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood on the strings.